Step on my tiptoes here. How's that volume? Good. We're so fortunate to have Dave Goulson here today with us from University of Sussex in the UK, where he's a professor of biology. He's also an author and founder of the Bumblebee Conservation Trust. Dave has been studying bumblebees for more than 20 years. That's a level of focus I really envy. Any topic. He's written a couple of brilliant books. This first one, A Sting in the Tail. The one after that, A Buzz in the Meadow, and I'm told he has a third one coming out this spring called Bee Quest, so I'll be looking for that. They're what I've dubbed scientific memoirs, kind of a really intriguing mix of his personal experiences. From experiences with small creatures from the time he was a kid, through his adventures in research, and his recent efforts to rewild a bit of land in France. Through all this, Dave has really gotten into my head. I read a lot of books, but so few really get into my head these days, but this one has. I've really been seeing my environment differently. I've been noticing more of the smaller creatures among us and trying my best to fear them less, especially spiders. Dave rescued me yesterday when there was a daddy longlegs almost on my lap. But he counsels not to slap them with the heaviest object you can find, but just let them be. Because they are, as he explains, critical components of every piece of wild, really, we have left remaining on this planet. Dave and I share, I think, a deep admiration for famed ecologist E.O. Wilson, who said, whether you're in your backyard or in a national park, which I do quite a bit of writing about, there are what he called wildernesses at your feet. Through Dave's work, he raises really important issues about, in particular, the decline of bumblebees across the UK, across Europe, and in North America. He'll talk more in detail, I think, about the factors that are causing those declines, and the knock-on effects, including many ecological and economical insecurity issues. In short, to quote Dave, bumblebees in particular are important because, quote, they pollinate things we really like to eat. So in his life and his work, there really are there are real lessons, real actions, I think, for all of us in our everyday lives. And it's with passion that Dave teaches us about some of those things. One of my favorite lines from A Sting in the Tail, which tells you, I think, a bit of where he comes from, is, quote, "I began studying bumblebees not because they're important pollinators, but because they're fascinating, because they behave in interesting and mysterious ways, and because they are rather lovable." So I hope you'll warmly help me welcoming Dave Goulson.
Thanks very much for that lovely introduction and the invitation to be here to help you celebrate, is it Pollinator Appreciation Month, I gather, in Boulder. There's all sorts of crazy stuff going on yesterday in the park, with many of you involved, I think. So I'm going to talk to you today about bees, and I'm going to start just by correcting a very common misapprehension, which probably nobody here, as you've come to a talk about bees, would make. But very many members of the public think there's only one species of bee. They think that it lives in a box and it makes honey. If you ask them to draw it, they'll draw something that's fat and has yellow and black stripes. And they're not the same thing at all. Of course, the thing that lives in the box and makes the honey is the honeybee. You can see one over there on the left. But the kind of cartoon yellow and black stripy bee is really a bumblebee. The ones in the middle, they're actually the things that I study, and they're kind of the wild cousins of honeybees. But that's just the tip of the bee iceberg. There are many, many more bees than that, and most of them nobody ever notices at all. So on the right there are a few examples of other bees. Mostly these are solitary bees. So the honeybee, of course, lives in a hive, and we all know it lives it has a queen and lots of her worker daughters. Thousands of them live in the hive with her. The bumblebees live in a much smaller hive with a queen and maybe 100 workers. Many of these others just live on their own and nobody ever notices them, but they're all important. They're all out there pollinating, doing something useful, be it pollinating wildflowers or pollinating our crops and so on. And as you can see there are actually more than 20,000 species of bee in the world. There's 4,000 known from North America. So there's an awful lot of bees that most people don't even know exist. which is kind of sad, I think. So I thought I'd start off by just showing you some pictures of a few of these bees. So many of those solitary bees are quite small and inconspicuous, which is why no one notices them. This is a type of leafcutter bee, which would probably live in your garden. They're common around here, and different species in England, all over the world, in fact. And you may well never notice one unless you look closely, but you might see signs they've been around, because they take little semicircular snips out of the edges of your rose and lilac leaves and use them to line their burrows. So that's a leafcutter bee. I'll just show you a few others, rather at random. There are some bees that look rather unlike bees, and you probably mistake it for a wasp or a yellow jacket. But this is actually a cuckoo bee, which specialises in creeping into the nests of other bees and laying its eggs in there. And just like the bird, the cuckoo, the eggs, when they hatch into a little tiny grub which has huge sharp mandibles, and the first thing it does is murders the offspring of its host, and then it eats all the food. So they're cuckoo bees. It sounds gruesome, but this is all part of nature. Given that this is the Jaipur Literature Festival, I thought I must put in at least one Indian bee. So they have many, many species in India. We have no idea actually how many, but this is the blue-banded Amagilla, a rather lovely thing. And just finally, in my tour of the bee world, we have orchid bees, perhaps the most beautiful, spectacular bees. You have to go to Central or South America to see one of these. They're called orchid bees because the males visit orchids to collect scents. They collect the scents from the flowers, not to eat, but to impress females. So the males have especially swollen hind legs, which are hollow, and they pack their legs with the volatile scents that they collect from the orchids. And then when they find a female bee, they waft their legs at them, and if they've got enough of the right smells and she likes it, then she mates, and off they go, and they'll live happily ever after. There are also lots of insects that look like bees, but actually aren't bees. They've evolved to mimic them because bees have a sting, and lots of predators avoid bees because of the sting. And actually these creatures are completely harmless. They have no defense at all. There are lots of flies in particular that have evolved to look like bees, and they often fool people, including the people that bound this book. So rather embarrassingly, Bees of the World features a fly on the cover. And it's not the fault of the authors at all. They weren't shown the jacket before 4,000 copies were printed. I imagine they were quite annoyed. Anyway, these are the ones that I study, bumblebees. So there are about 250 species of bumblebee in the world, 46 in North America. And I'll tell you just a little bit more about them. These are the most familiar of the kind of wild bees that you see out and about. Sadly, they've just about finished for the year here. I've been looking around in your parks the last day trying to find some, and all I've seen are honeybees. The bumblebees, I think, are all disappeared. They have an annual life cycle, so although they're social like the honeybee, they're different to the honeybee in that honeybee colonies live for several years, and they make their honey that's their food store to get them through the winter. That's naturally why they collect lots of honey. We obviously steal it, but their intention in collecting it is to act as their food supply for the winter. Bumblebee nests die in the summer, at the end of the summer, so they don't need to make lots of honey, although they do make a little bit just in case it rains for a few days. At the moment, the only bumblebees alive are young queens that will have mated a few weeks ago, and they're underground waiting. They're going to sleep right through to the next spring. And in April next year, you'll see these great big furry bees coming out of the ground. You probably won't see them coming out of the ground, but you'll see them flying about, visiting flowers. And once they've found a bit of food, they'll look for somewhere to nest, usually in a little hole in the ground where they hope to find the insulation of an old mouse nest. And there they build a nest. They rear daughters, the workers, and the nest grows through the spring, gets to maybe 100 or 200 workers, and then they produce new queens and males. And as with the honeybee, the males, their only job in life is to mate. They don't do any work in the nest, they don't collect food or anything else. They just look to mate with one of the new queens that are also produced in the summer. And as soon as those queens, in bumblebees, the queens mate just once with one male. It takes about half an hour, and as soon as they've mated, they burrow into the ground, and that's the end of their life cycle. The males, that's their job done, and they then die off. It's kind of sad, actually. There are lots more males born than new queens in bumblebees. About 7 times as many males as queens, and that means that 6 out of 7 males never get to do the only thing they were born to do, which is kind of sad, really. Anyway, that's the life cycle of the bumblebee, more or less. Bumblebees are specialists at living in quite cold places. So this is not a very easy it's a map of the world, as you probably worked out. It's not a very easy diagram to see in this light. But this shows you where you can find bumblebees. We think that they actually evolved somewhere near China about 30 million years ago. Bees have been around for about 120 million years. So bees first appeared in the age of the dinosaurs. But bumblebees came a bit later. And we think they evolved somewhere in Asia, southwest China, and they spread out from there through the cool parts of the world. So they spread west to Europe, and they got to the Americas via Siberia, and a few of them were spread down into the Andes of South America, but mostly they're found in cold climates, and they live right up into the Arctic Circle, right high up in the Rocky Mountains, places where it's too cold for most insects to fly about. But bumblebees have a kind of special trick, which is that they can produce heat internally. So I remember being taught when I was at school that insects are cold-blooded, that their body temperature is basically the same as the air temperature around them. But actually, for some insects, some big insects like bumblebees, that's not true. They create their own heat internally, and they regulate their body temperature, much like we do. In fact, the body temperature of a bumblebee, when she's active, is about the same as ours. So this is a terrible picture, and you probably can't see what on earth I'm trying to show, but the white stuff is snow, and in the middle there, you can just about see, if you squint, a bumblebee visiting the flowers that have got snow all over them. The air temperature when that picture was taken was about 0 degrees, but that bumblebee inside was about 30 degrees centigrade, so whatever that is in Fahrenheit. Pretty warm, and it's a really unusual ability that they have, that most insects don't have, which enables them to live in Alaska and Siberia and high up in the mountains and so on. If you take an infrared picture of a bumblebee, you can see that the heat is all coming from the bit of so a bumblebee's body has a head, and then there's a round bit where the wings are attached called the thorax, and then the abdomen behind that. And it's the thorax that produces all of this heat. And it's full of muscles. And the heat is produced by contracting their flight muscles. So a bumblebee to fly has to flap her wings about 200 times a second. And that creates a lot of heat. You try flapping your arms 200 times a second. You get very warm very quickly. And the fur on the bee keeps that warmth in, and that's how they manage to fly around in cold weather and so on. It comes at a cost, though, which is that it uses loads and loads of energy to flap your wings so fast and to fly around in cold air. So someone once calculated that so a running man burns the calories in a Mars bar in about an hour of running, which is quite a depressing statistic if you're running to lose weight. If you were a man-sized bumblebee, you would burn the calories in a Mars bar in 30 seconds of flying, which kind of puts it into perspective. And it means they need lots of energy, they need lots of flowers to fuel their activities. And if there aren't enough flowers in the landscape, then they're in trouble, and they will run out of energy, they'll get cold, and then they can't fly, and they can't take off. And it's quite common in the spring in particular to see bumblebees walking on the ground, and it's because they've run out of energy. And people often rescue them by giving them a bit of nectar, a bit of sugar water on a spoon or whatever, and it usually works. And actually, this kind of brings me. This talk is not really about my books at all, but I'm going to read you a tiny bit from my book because it's my earliest memory of bumblebees, and it sort of relates to this point. So you should remember that I was only about 6 or 7 when this happened. On one occasion, after a heavy summer rainstorm, I found a number of bedraggled bumblebees clinging to my buddleia and decided to dry them out. Unfortunately for the bees, I was perhaps a bit too young to have a good grasp of the practicalities. With hindsight, finding my mum's hairdryer and giving them a gentle blow dry might have been the most sensible option. Instead, I laid the torpid bees on the hot plate of the electric cooker, covered them in a layer of tissue paper and turned the hot plate onto low. Being young, I got bored of waiting for them to warm up and wandered off to feed my gerbils. Sadly, my attention didn't return to the bees until I noticed the smoke. The tissue paper had caught fire and the poor bees had been frazzled. I felt terrible. My first foray into bumblebee conservation was a catastrophic disaster. So actually, blow drying was probably not the best idea either. Just give them some food. If you do find some bumblebees wandering around on the ground, give them some sugar water, and hopefully, don't set light to them anyway. Okay, so they need lots of flowers, and they've evolved all sorts of clever tricks to ensure that they find the most rewarding flowers really quickly. And that was actually jumping on in my life. The thing that first got me interested in studying bumblebees, 20 or so years after the bee burning incident. So I noticed something that anyone can see when bees are on the wing. If you watch bumblebees, or for that matter honeybees do this too, in a patch of flowers, you'll see the bees, they fly from flower to flower, of course. But they don't land on every flower. They will commonly fly up to a flower, very close, just as this bee is doing here, with their antennae outstretched. And at the last minute, they'll veer away. They won't land, they won't touch the flower. They'll, for some reason, decide they don't like the look of it, then something's wrong with it, and they'll go on. And they might do that 2 or 3 times before they land on a flower and feed. And I was sitting in a little nature reserve, and I saw bees doing this, and I thought, I don't know, what are they doing? What's wrong with the flowers they don't land on? And so I set about finding out, and it took about 5 years to get to the bottom of it, working with a PhD student called Jane Stout. And I'll cut the very long story short. It turns out that what they're doing is they're sniffing the flower with our antennae, and they're sniffing it not because they can directly tell how much food is in it, but to smell if another bee has been there recently. So every time a bee lands on a flower, she accidentally leaves behind a little smear of oils from her cuticle, just as we, when we put down a wine glass, leave behind a little smear, a fingerprint of oils from our skin. Bees do exactly the same. It's not deliberate, it's accidental, they can't avoid it. And the subsequent bees, they sniff the flowers, and if they can detect a whiff of a recent bee visitor, then there's no point in landing, because that recent bee visitor will have taken the food, the flower will be empty, and they'll be wasting their time. So they save themselves maybe half a second of flower by not putting their tongue into an empty flower, which doesn't sound like much, but if you're visiting 10,000 flowers a day, that really adds up, and it makes them that bit more efficient at collecting the food, and that much less likely to run out of energy and end up walking along the ground. So they visit lots of flowers to fuel all of this activity and to feed to their offspring and so on. And that makes bees really important pollinators. As I said at the beginning, different bees tend to visit different flowers and are good at different things. So depending on what crop you're growing, you want different bees to pollinate it. So for example, almonds are mostly pollinated by honeybees. But if you're growing tomatoes, you need bumblebees, because honeybees haven't ever worked out how to pollinate tomatoes properly. Just one example, there are lots of others. But these are just some of the things, the fruits and veg, that we rely on bees of one sort or another to pollinate. It's about 1/3 of all the food we eat requires some kind of insect, usually a bee of some sort, to pollinate it. And although it's 1/3, it includes all of the really nice stuff, all the fruits and veg that make our food tasty. Imagine a world without tomatoes or blueberries or raspberries or runner beans or courgettes or tomatoes or chili peppers, and on and on and on I could go. They're all things that we wouldn't have if we didn't have pollinating insects. And that's quite nicely illustrated here. So this shows you a before and after, a supermarket with all the usual fruit and veg on the shelves, but then take away the ones that we wouldn't have if we didn't have bees, and that's what your supermarket would look like. So we really need to make sure we look after our bees if we want to continue to enjoy all these lovely things. Sadly, bees are disappearing. So we really should be concerned, given what I've just said. And I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of bees that aren't doing so well. One from the UK to start off with. So this is a thing called the great yellow bumblebee. It's a beautiful thing. You don't have them here, but it used to be found. There's this little squares show you where it's been recorded in Britain. That's in the beginning of the first half of the 20th century. It was scattered all over Britain. It was always more common in Scotland in the north. But by the second half of the 20th century, most of those populations had gone extinct. And today, if you want to see one, you've got to go to Scotland. And even there, you've got to go right to the far north and west. They've gone from most of Britain. They're extinct in England and Wales. Actually, in that same period, 3 other species of bumblebee have gone completely extinct within Britain. Coming over to the States here, you've also seen some really dramatic declines of some of your bees. So this thing, Bombus affinis, the rusty-patched bumblebee, used to be one of the commonest insects in eastern North America. People doing bee counts or wildlife counts 25 years ago in eastern North America counted these by the thousand in every meadow. They're nearly extinct now. Something happened in the last 25 years. The red dots show, so the black area is where they used to be very common. The red dots show recent records, but there's just a handful of them left. It's like the passenger pigeon. It's gone from being enormously common to almost extinct in no time at all. In fact, during the same period, we've also lost Franklin's bumblebee. You may have heard. He's actually gone. This is the first global extinction of any bumblebee. It's a species that lived in California and Oregon. Hasn't been seen since 2006. It's almost certainly gone for good from the world. That's it for Franklin's bumblebee. So we should be really worried about this. And we actually, from a scientific perspective, what we really want to do is have better monitoring schemes in place so we can see which bees are in most trouble, so that we can target our conservation efforts to look after them. And actually what we really want is a count of the number of nests, because each nest is one breeding female bee. And if we could count the number of bumblebee nests every year, that would be a really cool thing to be able to do from a scientific point of view, to measure how well different species were doing in different places and so on. But as I said at the beginning, they nest in little holes in the ground. The nests are quite hard to find. And so there is no easy way to do a kind of annual census of bumblebee nests. We thought we had a solution a few years ago, which was inspired by badgers. So in the UK, badgers are big predators of bumblebee nests. They dig them up at night and they eat the whole thing. They eat all the bees, all their brood and offspring and the wax and everything. They don't seem to be bothered by the stings. And they must find them by smell. Bumblebee nests are actually really smelly. They're not very hygienic creatures, and if you do find a bumblebee nest, it's quite whiffy. It tastes like sorry, I've never tasted one. It smells like sort of off cake or something. It's rather odd. Anyway, we figured if badgers could smell them, then dogs should be able to smell them. And so one day, we rang up the army and asked them if they'd train us a dog to look for bumblebee nests. They have an army training camp where they train dogs to usually to find explosives. And we didn't really think they'd say yes, but to our surprise, I think they were bored of training dogs to get blown up in the Middle East. And they said, yeah, we'll train you a dog to find bumblebee nests. And we sent them some bits of old bumblebee nests to use to train the dog with. And they trained us Chad, the world's first bumblebee sniffer dog. Unfortunately, he was absolutely rubbish, and he was sacked after a fortnight. And replaced by Quinn here, who kind of graduated and was delivered to us by the army. And he spent 2 years with one of my other PhD students, Joe, looking for those great yellow bumblebees in Scotland. And he did find some of their nests, but he didn't find very many. He only found about one a day, and we were pretty sure that wasn't really, must have been more there that he wasn't finding. So in the end, we had a third one trained up, which was the best. This one was called Toby. And that was Steph O'Connor, his handler. He was the best sniffer dog we ever had, and he did find lots of bumblebee nests. But even it was odd. He would find sometimes tiny little bumblebee nests that we would never have found without his help. And then he would walk straight past a whopping great bumblebee nest that we knew was there without twitching at all. And we to this day, I don't know why. So in the end, he did retire. But he did find out some useful stuff, or at least we found out some useful stuff from his efforts. So when Steph and Toby found a bumblebee nest, we wanted to then monitor what happened to it, whether it survived. The video's off. Sorry. We stop it again and start again. Hang on. I need a quick preamble. So they set up a camera to film every nest they found, so that filming it 24 hours a day, so that we could see if the nest survived, if it was eaten by a badger, if it produced queens at the end of the summer, and so on. It's really grainy footage, because you can imagine if you're filming 24 hours a day for months on end, it has to be. But nonetheless, so I just wanted to show you, it's kind of a new discovery we made, something no one had ever seen before, so far as we know. So there's a little hole into a bumblebee nest at the bottom centre of this picture, and you can just about make out a bee that's about to go into there. Sorry if you can't see it very well, I'd point to it, but my arm's not long enough. But then you'll see what happens next if we run the video again, and sorry about the music. another bee will come down from the top in a second. Sorry, Steph put that music on there, so it wasn't me. So you can just about see at the end there, that bird, it's a thing we call a great tit, which is an unfortunate name, but anyway, that's what they're called. It's related to chickadees in North America. It turns out that they regularly stake out bumblebee nests. It wasn't just one bird and one nest. We had lots of bumblebee nests that every day a different bird would come and it would just sit outside and it would pick off the bumblebee workers as they came in and eat them. And each bird had learnt its own way of dismembering bumblebees. So most of them would snip the top of the thorax off and scoop out the flight muscles like eating a hard-boiled egg. But a few of them would snip the tail off and then scoop out the contents of their body that way. And each bird did it the same way over and over again. So you'd end up with this little pile of identically dismembered bumblebees next to the nest entrance. But no one had ever seen that before. It was kind of cool, a new bit of biology that was no one had ever discovered. Okay, so back to the depressing stuff before we go on finish with something more cheerful. So I showed you some examples of bees declining. Why have they declined? Well, there are lots of reasons, and the reality is that the bees are being kind of stressed from multiple directions at the same time. It is quite a complicated subject, and I haven't got time to go into in great depth. But there's at least 4 big problems that bees face up here. The way farming has changed the countryside generally. There are issues about diseases, which I won't talk about today. Pesticides I'll say a tiny bit more about. And climate change is another one, which I haven't got time to go into, but as you can see straight away, I'm sure, having what I said about bumblebees liking cold conditions, that climate change isn't really good news for them. But first, so if we go back to the top one here, agricultural intensification and what it's done to the countryside. The world used to have lots more flowers. In Western Europe, we used to have lots of beautiful flower-rich hay meadows. You can't see it terribly well, but this is a picture of one. It's absolutely full of flowers, and you can see that would have been bee heaven. In Britain alone, which is a little country, we used to have 7 million acres of this flower-rich habitat 100 years ago, and we lost about 98% of it in the 20th century. It's slightly different here, but you also had some really spectacular, beautiful flower-rich grasslands. This is one from California, a little tiny fragment of what is left, and you can see in the distance what has replaced it. If we could just have the next one. We've turned a lot of the surface of the globe over to huge monocultures of crops. And if we do that, then inevitably wildlife will pay a heavy price. A landscape like this, and you can find landscapes like this all over the world now, whether it's Brazil or Argentina or North America or Europe or wherever. Huge fields with just one plant growing, one crop. And obviously we need to feed the world, we need to feed people. But if we choose to do it this way, then we will lose our wildlife. Relating to that is this issue of pesticides, which is probably the most controversial aspect of the problems that bees face. Now, this is something that my own research group really focus on at Sussex University at the moment. And I'm just putting up this, I know this is a ridiculous slide with a bewildering list of names on it. But it illustrates an important point. So we've been studying the health of bumblebee colonies living in farmland around the university in the south of England where we work. And we asked the local farmers to tell us what pesticides they put onto each field each year. And this is just the list of pesticides that went onto one field in 1 year, in one growing season, from when the crop was sown. This is canola, oilseed rape we call it, which was sown in August 2012 and harvested in June 2013. And those were the chemicals that went onto it. There's a couple of fertilizers in there, but there are 20 different types of pesticide. They've got insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, and molluscicides, a whole cocktail of stuff. Now, I haven't got time to go into all of this in great depth, but I was quite astonished when I saw this. I hadn't realized quite how many chemicals are used in farming. This wasn't a bad farm, this was a perfectly typical field. And all the evidence I have suggests that farmers here use more or less the same range and number of chemicals on their fields as we do in the UK. They're getting all of their advice from the same chemical companies, and they're growing more or less the same crops. So I'm pretty sure it's very similar here too. And there's a couple of points. One is obviously if you're a bee that visits this crop, it's a flowering crop, then you're going to be exposed to a whole barrage of a cocktail of chemicals, which is unlikely to do them any good. But if you think about it, just to bring it closer to home, if you were growing fruit and veg in your garden to feed to yourself or your kids or your grandchildren or whatever, would you be comfortable putting 20 different pesticides on it and then feeding it to the children? You probably wouldn't, but that's routine practice across most of the surface of the planet where we have farmland. And it's something I think we need to think very carefully about. I'm going to focus a little bit on one group of pesticides just for a few seconds, because these are probably the most controversial of the pesticides currently in use. There's been lots of debate, lots of stuff in the newspapers about neonicotinoids. So that crop that I just showed you, one of the many chemicals on that list was a thing called thiamethoxam, which is one of these neonicotinoids. They're neurotoxins. They're the newest generation of insecticides available to farmers. They were introduced in the mid-90s, and they've become enormously popular. Most arable crops in the world are treated with these chemicals. So that graph just shows you how use in the UK has changed since '94 when they were first introduced. Basically, whoosh, farmers love them. They're mostly used as seed dressings, so that funny purple stuff top right, those are canola seeds that the farmer buys pre-treated with the pesticide, and they're systemic, so they're sucked up by the plant as it grows, and they go to all parts of the plant and protect it against any insect that might nibble it, which sounds great. The farmer doesn't have to do anything, he doesn't have to spray anything, he just plants the seed. But it means that if it's a flowering crop, they're going into the pollen and the nectar of the crop. So if it's canola, then when a bee comes along the next spring, the bee is getting a dose of neurotoxin with its food. And these things are enormously toxic. So the way toxicity is usually measured is by an LD50, which stands for the lethal dose that kills 50% of your test creatures, your honeybees or whatever it might be you're studying. And it takes just 4 billionths of a gram, 4 nanograms, to give an LD50 to a honeybee, which is hard to get your head around. But put that another way, that means that 1 teaspoon of one of these neonicotinoids, imidacloprid is one of them, by the way, 1 teaspoon, 5 grams, is enough to give an LD50, a lethal dose, to 1.25 billion honeybees. And just in the UK, we apply 110,000 kilos of this stuff to the landscape every year. You probably use in the order of 10 times that here. Compared to DDT, which is an awful chemical that's long since been banned for most uses, these things are way, way more toxic to bees, about 6,000 or 7,000 times more toxic to bees. You can also buy them for garden use, and I really would urge you not to. Your garden centre will sell you a whole range of insecticides and other pesticides to chuck around willy-nilly. Please don't. There's absolutely no need. If you've got a few greenfly on your roses, leave them be. Something will come along. A ladybird will probably eat them before long. And worst case scenario, you have some greenfly on your roses. The alternative is to have a garden full of poison. I know which one I go for. Just before I will finish ranting about pesticides in just a second, on the right there, you should also be aware that if you have a dog or a cat, you might well be advised by your vet to prophylactically treat it against fleas with one of various products, including this one, which is a big seller, Advocate, which is also these same chemicals. This is imidacloprid. The dose you're advised to put on a dog every month to protect it against fleas is enough to kill 60 million honeybees, or 60 partridges, probably one dog if they were to eat it, but it goes on the back of their neck so that they can't. Probably enough to kill a child as well, and you're putting it on your dog every month. Obviously that isn't a problem unless 60 million honeybees eat your dog, which is unlikely, but nonetheless it raises questions about where this chemical is going if we're all dripping it onto our dogs and cats every month. Just to finish, this kind of makes me laugh. It says something about the companies that sell these chemicals. This was a special promotion we had a couple of years ago in Europe where you could get free seeds for bees with your bee-killing chemicals. There's a certain irony to the whole thing, isn't there? So to finish the doom and gloom, this is what we need to avoid. These pictures are taken from southwest China, where they now have to hand pollinate their apples and pears, and that's what these people are doing, because essentially all bees are extinct in this part of the world. They've wiped them all out. And we need to make darn sure that this doesn't happen in the rest of the world. So what can we do? Well, the good news is there's loads of stuff that we can all get involved in. Bees are kind of different to some of the big conservation issues which you might feel helpless about. So, you know, things like polar bears and the ice caps melting is pretty difficult as an individual to do anything direct that's going to really help. The rainforest being cut down, tigers disappearing, whatever. But with bees, because they live all around us, there's lots that everyone can do to help. I'm just going to run through some of the things that you might do to help bees in your local neighbourhood or area or whatever. You might try and plant a meadow full of flowers. Now, that requires you to have a meadow, and I guess most people don't. My second book is about doing this in France. I bought a meadow specifically to turn it into a kind of bumblebee nature reserve, which is a project that's been going on for more than 10 years now, but it's been really rewarding. That's a picture of, it used to be an arable field, and that's a picture of one little corner of it, which is now full of flowers, and it's been slowly turning into a flower meadow over this long period. It can be done, it's quite slow and tedious, and you need a meadow to start with, so that's probably not very practical for most people. At the other end of the spectrum of ease of doing, just telling your friends about these issues is a good start. We need to raise awareness. That's why I'm here today, that's why I've written the books, that's why all this stuff that's going on in Boulder about pollinators is really great, because it's helping to spread the word that these insects are important, and that they need to be looked after. And until everyone knows that, they're not going to. People don't care about something they don't know about. I think it's really important to engage with children and teach them about these things from an early age. And again, it was really nice seeing lots of kids in the park yesterday learning about bees. We've developed a primary school education kit lesson about bumblebees, and these pictures here, you can't see them terribly well, but it shows you a before and after of a class before their 2-hour lesson about bumblebees and afterwards. So the first thing that we did was ask them to draw a bumblebee, having told them nothing about bumblebees. And at the top you can see their drawings, which are pretty rubbish, to be honest. They don't look much like bumblebees, but they've got yellow and black stripes, most of them. 2 hours later, having learned all about the wonder of bumblebees, we asked them to draw a bumblebee again, and the drawings are much more accurate. They've got the right number of legs and wings and stuff, which doesn't really matter. These are 7-year-olds after all. But so look, top left was a blonde kid looking really unimpressed at the prospect of learning about bees for 2 hours. Bottom right, 2 hours later, he loved it. Big smile on his face. Hopefully, he will remember that into the future. And garden or farm or whatever he does in his life slightly differently as a result of that lesson. But wouldn't it be great if we could do that for all of our kids? Another thing you can get involved in is there are various citizen science projects around the world that you can get involved in to help find out what's happening with our bees. We run one from the University of Sussex called the Buzz Club, which is of no relevance to you folk here. But there are a couple of North American schemes. There's a thing called Bumblebee Watch, which if you Google it, is a scheme where you can upload photographs and they'll be identified for you. And if you say where the photograph was taken, that helps to create up-to-date maps as to where bees are and helps to monitor how they're doing in North America, which is a really cool thing to get kids involved in and so on. And finally, the most obvious thing you can do is you can garden in a bee-friendly way, if you have a garden, and most people have some kind of patch. Even a window box with the right flowers in it will attract bees, even in the middle of a big city. And that really does make a difference, because the loss of flowers is one of the biggest problems that they face. Giving them some clean, healthy food to feed on is an easy thing to do. It's an easy win. And I haven't got time. It's kind of a complicated subject, wildlife gardening, but I'm just going to give you a couple of quick do's and don'ts about how to look after bees. So, firstly, we call them annual bedding plants. I don't know if you use the same term here, but in the UK people buy lots of annual plants, these bright showy things that you get from your garden centre in the spring, and they flower all year and you throw them away in the autumn. Don't buy them, they're horrible things. You might think they're pretty, I don't know, I think they're ghastly, creepy things. They've been selected for these huge showy flowers and long flowering period, and that intensive selection has removed their original function, which was to attract and feed bees so that they got pollinated. They've either lost their scent or their pollen or their nectar or all three, or they're now a shape that bees can no longer get into. So you see no insects going anywhere near most of these things all summer long. So get rid of those and plant some more traditional cottage garden flowers. There are loads to choose from. These are ones from my garden, and obviously it's slightly different here, but many of the same ones are available. Most garden herbs are fantastic for bees. You'll recognise some of these, I'm sure. Some of these are North American plants, of course. Just to give you an illustration of a good and a bad flower. So these are both roses, of course. The one on the right is a more wild-type rose, which bees really like. It produces pollen and nectar for bees. The one on the left you might think is very pretty, but it's a mutant. It's a mutant in which instead of producing anthers, it produces extra petals, which produces this, I guess, kind of beautiful flower, but it's a complete waste of space as far as a bee is concerned, because the anthers are what produce the pollen that the bee is after. And if they're instead producing petals, then that's no good to a bee. So next time you're choosing a rose, go for one of the old-fashioned simple varieties. Or grow some wildflowers. There are lots of wildflowers. Again, these are European wildflowers, these are not North American wildflowers, but there are loads of sources of wildflower seed in North America that are suitable for growing in different climates and places, including here. If you don't have a garden, or even if you do, but as an additional thing you might do, how about badgering your local council and getting them to change the way they manage the parks, the road verges, the roundabouts? You don't call them roundabouts here, do you, I don't think? You do? Okay, cool. There's all this land that that is often just mown over and over again. It's often treated with selective herbicides to kill anything that isn't a grass. It doesn't need to be like that. We could have flowers in all of our parks and road verges and so on. This is from a picture taken in Stirling, where I used to live in Scotland. And there's a little group of volunteers who every weekend they go out and they sow wildflowers. They badger the local council or anyone else that owns land, and they ask them if they can dig up a bit of it and sow some wildflower seeds. There are now 52 patches like this. This is the road verge, but there are also roundabouts. There are the edges of playing fields, school yards and so on. All of them with patches of flowers where there were no flowers at all before. And it makes a huge difference. So imagine if we could do that in all of our gardens and all of the council land. It would turn our cities into giant bee nature reserves. There's a roundabout full of flowers. One final thing that's an easy win for bees is make a bee hotel or buy a bee hotel. These are not for bumblebees, but for some of these solitary bees that I mentioned at the beginning. And they work really well. All you need is, they just need holes to nest in. And that ugly thing on the left is a fence post that I had in my garden. I drilled some holes in it, 8mm drill bit, I don't know what that is in inches, I'm afraid. And within 20 minutes in the spring, I had that thing top right. It's an osmia. You have different species of osmia here that will use yours. I had one within 20 minutes coming to investigate. And then a bit later in the year, you get those leafcutter bees that I mentioned earlier on. There's one bottom right using the same holes. It's great for kids. You can make much more attractive ones than my ugly fence post design. These are some little ones made out of bits of bamboo cane and so on. They don't always work, but they usually do, and it's really good fun to watch these little bees coming and going, stocking the tubes with pollen and lining them with leaves and so on. And you're really doing a little bit to help the bees. Way of introducing people to the importance of insects more generally. Most people out there have understood that we need bees because they pollinate our crops, but of course, actually, we need lots of other stuff as well. We need to look after nature more generally because there are all sorts of other creatures that do important stuff, like ladybirds and hoverflies that eat pests, worms that keep the soil healthy, dung beetles and flies and so on that help to recycle dung and release the nutrients so that new crops will grow. We're connected to nature, and I think a lot of people have lost sight of that. But maybe we can start with bees as a way of helping to bring people around to realising that we need to look after all of life on Earth. Bees in particular, they've been pollinating our crops for the last 10,000 years since we started growing crops in the Middle East. Now they're in trouble, and they're entirely in trouble because of what we have done to them. So we'll just urge you all to do something to help the bees, and maybe collectively we can ensure that they have a future. Thank you very much for listening.